Welcome to another episode of Cal's Corner radio show here on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. My name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host, and Rob McConnell is the executive producer of this show. Now, folks, as you know, on Cal's Corner here, we cover everything from politics to the paranormal. That's a wide variety of subjects. So what we're going to do is we have a very special show today. It's actually a two-parter. We're going to open and give an update, a very blunt, brutal assessment of the skirmishes and a little miniature war, if you will, that has broken out along the border in Gaza, in so-called Palestine and Israel, between the terrorist groups Hamas, the Palestinian National Authority, Islamic Jihad, and the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. Those are the other terrorist groups involved in this. And then that's going to be the first two segments of the show. And then for segments 3 and 4, we're going to bring on a top journalist named Levine, who is going to blow open and expose some of the myths concerning the Veterans Administration and the opioid scandal that is slowly getting the kind of attention in the media. Finally, the question is, will the government be ultimately doing the right thing? Art is the expert on it. I'm not. We're going to talk about that. And then next week, Art will be back with us to finish off talking about that and a few other peripherally related issues. He will be on for the entire 4 segments next week. He's on for the first half of this show because of the eruption and hostilities that has broken out between Gaza, Hamas, and Israel. We have to give you an update on that first. So here goes. Now, in the Middle East, there is absolutely a battle for the future of the Middle East going on right now. In other words, it's a bit more complicated than just the issue of Iran versus Saudi Arabia. So while this Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia has toured the U.S. seeking foreign direct investment to help transform his country so that it becomes a more modern, open, and tolerant Western-style society, terrorist groups such as Hamas, Islamic Jihad, and the Palestinian National Authority, let's call them the PNA for short, have now instigated violence against Israel in a last-gasp effort to remain relevant. Now, let's start with the story of Khalid al-Bach. He is a key figure in the terrorist group Islamic Jihad, who, like Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State, and countless other Islamic and Islamo-fascist terrorist groups, claims that the Jewish state of Israel has, quote, no right to exist, unquote. In fact, a popular slogan, often screamed for decades by these haters and extremists, is that they will, quote, drive the Jews into the sea, unquote. Now, the difference between an Islamist terrorist group versus an Islamo-fascist terrorist group has to do with their focus, and it is important to know the differences. Islamist terrorist groups seek only regional or local conquest. Perhaps the best example of one is the Afghan Taliban. They're not interested in what happens in Europe, nor are they targeting it. Islamo-fascist groups, however, seek global conquest, unified behind an all-powerful leader, or caliph, as they call it. Some very real examples of Islamo-fascist terrorist groups are Al-Qaeda and the Islamic State. While left-wing liberals, politically correct types, and self-proclaimed progressives condemn the use of the term Islamo-fascist, they're wrong. For it is important to label groups properly who have only a local or regional focus versus those who seek world conquest. Obviously, the threats they pose vary, and it's vital to understand their key differences. In other words, the Islamic State, or Al-Qaeda, is a much greater threat to world stability and security than the Taliban are, who are focused again only in the area of Afghanistan. So during a press conference where he gleefully showcased his hatred of Israel, Bach boasted that he has now successfully, quote, buried forever American President Donald Trump's suspicious deal where it concerns trying to broker a permanent peace settlement between Israel and the Palestinians. Now, what Bach did not say is what really matters. He lacks any real psychic power, so he has no idea what is actually in Trump's impending proposal. But facts don't matter to Jew haters and terrorist groups in general. Instead, furthering their twisted agenda by murdering innocent people does matter to them. For the very definition of the word terrorism is the deliberate and systematic targeting of innocent people for the purposes of forcing political or social change. This is why Hamas has engaged in everything from suicide bombings to kidnapping and murdering Jews, even slitting the throats of Jewish children. Hamas, like other Jew-hating terrorist groups, claims that the Israelis it has murdered are not innocent. It says that since they served in the military, this fact somehow makes them legitimate targets. Now, this is yet another lie by Hamas. Jewish children are not in the Israeli Defense Forces. This reality doesn't matter to Hamas. The fact they are Jews does. Now, let's talk about the so-called March for Return, which is what this whole uprising is being marketed as by these terrorist groups. Now, as a crowd of Palestinians during the past few weeks, estimated to be as large as 30,000 in number, began assembling in groups of tents along the border that they share in Gaza with Israel, predictable incidents of violence began to take place. At least 3 Hamas terrorists tried to use the cover of this crowd to plant explosives and blow open holes in the border fence with Israel. Israeli snipers, who were put into position in advance of the official start of this march, as many as 100 of them, shot and killed these 3 operatives in what is unquestionably a justifiable act of defensive counterterrorism. Now, Hamas and others resorted to their immoral tactics of trying to use children and human shields, taunting and daring Israeli soldiers to try to kill them. These so-called peaceful Palestinians in Gaza hurled rocks, used slingshots, and threw deadly Molotov cocktails at Israeli soldiers. They also fired weapons at them. And in retaliation, Israel destroyed at least 3 Hamas facilities, and as many as 1,100 people seem to have been injured, and some 16 Palestinians on that first day were killed. Now, not surprisingly, of the 16 Palestinians that were killed by Israeli snipers, at least 10 of them were militants from at least 3 different terrorist groups. Now, I'll prove it. The names of the Hamas terrorists who are now dead are Hamdan Abu Amshi, Ahmed Odeh, a guy who calls himself Jihad Frina, another terrorist belonging to Hamas called Sari Abdu Odeh, Mossab Sowal, Mohammed Rumi, and Abed El-Rahman Abed. Now, of particular note, among those the Israeli snipers killed, Mohammed Abu Amro was also eliminated. He was an important terrorist because he's part of Hamas's terrorist tunnel digging group. Other individuals such as Jihad Zuhair Salman Abu Jamu from the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigades and El Ibrahim Abu Sharir from the Islamic Jihad were also among those terminated by Israeli snipers. So these weren't innocent, peaceful Palestinians protesting peacefully. These were terrorists. They were acting illegally, and in a valid act of self-defense, Israel took them out. Now, the purpose of staging these planned protests, euphemistically called by the PNA, Islamic Jihad, Hamas, and other pro-Palestinian sympathizers as a so-called March for Return, are now expected to continue until mid-May 2018. And part of their purpose is to sabotage the USA's upcoming move to relocate its embassy to the city of Jerusalem and to reject in advance any proposed peace plans for a 2-state solution that the Trump administration is expected to unveil. Now, the opening of the new embassy, the U.S. Embassy, is scheduled to take place during the upcoming 70th anniversary of the founding of the modern state of Israel. Other countries such as Ecuador and Czech Republic also have plans to relocate their diplomatic staff as well. Even members of the European Parliament are saying that it's kind of obvious that the city of Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. Now, Hamas is adamant that these new actions mark the beginning of what they call, quote, the return of all of Palestine to the Arabs. Translation, no Jews. Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, using his usual bravado and drama queen vernacular, even brags that Gazans will, quote, eat the livers of those who occupy Palestinian lands. Hamas views remain the same as they always have. Israel has no right to exist, and that, quote, every inch of Palestine belongs to the Arabs. Now, Palestinian National Authority President Mahmoud Abbas, who is now in the 12th year of his original 4-year term in office, has told the media that Israel is, quote, fully responsible, unquote, for the violence and deaths that have now occurred. What Abbas does not say, as usual, is where the real truth exists. Had these so-called peaceful Palestinians not resorted to using violence, Israel would never have retaliated because there would be no reason to. It's kind of obvious. It's kind of logical. Duh. So in his typical tired drama queen shtick, Abbas has now begged the United Nations to come to his rescue, and then he says that, quote, the large number of martyrs and injured in peaceful demonstrations affirms the need for the international community to intervene to provide protection for our people, unquote. Well, Abbas, not surprisingly, is outright lying. His protesters have not been peaceful, and those who died after attacking Israeli military personnel are certainly not martyrs. They are instead terrorists, fools, and cowards. To try to delegitimize Israel's existence, especially as a Jewish state, Palestinians demand that the historically Jewish capital of Jerusalem be their capital city as well. We'll be back after this commercial break to continue our segment on the uprising in Gaza.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan, and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365.
You have heard of the X-Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X-Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com.
Welcome back to segment 2 here on Cal's Corner Radio Show. My name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host. And the executive producer of the show, once again, is the legendary Rob McConnell. Now, continuing with our segment here on the uprising of tensions between Hamas and the Palestinians and Israel, again, to try to delegitimize Israel's existence, especially as a Jewish state, Palestinians demand that the historically Jewish capital city of Jerusalem be their capital city as well. To use an analogy, this would be like Pakistan demanding that India's capital city of New Delhi also serve as Pakistan's capital city. Now, Palestinians and Jew haters alike are infamous for ignoring historical facts that they refuse to face. To briefly recap a few examples which are beyond dispute, the city of Jerusalem became Israel's capital city under King David in the year 1000 BC. You do the math. That's 3,018 years ago, well before Islam ever existed, as well as any present-day Palestinians. If anything, to be very blunt about this matter, the very idea that Palestinians are somehow magically either a distinctive race or people is one of the greatest lies ever invented by the likes of terrorists such as the now exposed and disgraced Yasser Arafat. There is no language called Palestinian. In fact, the letter P does not exist in the Arabic language. There is no ancient Palestinian coinage. There are no distinctive Palestinian textiles. There is no old pottery. There is no historical works of great literature. There has never been any past Palestinian kings nor queens. There are no ancient Palestinian monuments nor historic palaces, despite there being plenty of past Jewish and Roman ones, even entire ancient cities, but none of them are Palestinian. Now, one tactic the Palestinians use is the claim of what they call the right of return. This idea is that Palestinians must be allowed to return to the lands they claim they were ousted from. They not only insist on this right, they have also demanded that it be extended to the offspring of those Palestinians who were uprooted. Don't be fooled by this hate-driven deception. The real reason they demand this is because they know that if this were allowed, it would mean the influx of millions of Arabs into the Jewish state, thus eliminating Israel's distinctly Jewish identity and its very existence as a nation that is home for the Jews. Now, Khalil al-Hayya, who is a senior Hamas official, claims that, quote, "Our people will not be intimidated by the Israeli threats. We have waited for too long to return to the lands from which our grandparents were expelled 70 years ago," unquote. What al-Hayya does not say, nor do millions of Muslims, is that the land they claim belongs to them was for thousands of years Jewish. Palestinians, as they are called today, are largely a modern-day invention. In fact, it was the Romans who renamed the ancient kingdom of Judea, changing its name, all in an attempt to strip the Jews of their identity. Muslims later invaded ancient Israel, yet hypocritically, they never view themselves as occupiers. They were forced to leave this area of the Middle East at the end of World War I, when the British and French defeated the Ottoman Turks and dissolved the Ottoman Empire. The Ottomans conquered and occupied the historic land of the Jews for hundreds of years. Now let's talk about the United Nations. In response to a request by the country of Kuwait, the UN Security Council has already met. Predictably, the Secretary General is already calling for an independent investigation, quote-unquote, into what happened, despite the fact that it's kind of obvious. The short version is that tens of thousands of Palestinians assembled at various points along the Israeli border with Gaza. They started firing weapons and trying to kill Jews. Israel responded by defending itself. Officially, Egypt, Jordan, Turkey, and the historically hapless Arab League have formally come out to condemn Israel, while in reality, behind closed doors, their real attitudes are arguably different. Now let's talk about the Saudis real quickly before we end this segment. The recently minted and reformist-minded Crown Prince of Saudi Arabia, Mohammed bin Salman, has told the Palestinians that they must accept Israel's right to exist and agree to a two-state solution. He is not the only Arab leader to believe this. In fact, most Arab leaders now understand the obvious, that their real enemy is not the Jewish state, but instead it is the radical regime in Iran. Crown Prince bin Salman said, quote, "I believe that each people anywhere has a right to live in their peaceful nation. I believe the Palestinians and the Israelis have the right to have their own land. But we have to have a peace agreement to assure the stability for everyone to have normal relations." Now that's his statement on the subject. By contrast, you have Ayatollah Khamenei in Iran saying, absolutely under no circumstances does Israel have a right to exist. It must be wiped out. So who's the more radical? Obviously Iran is. Now, this realization and statement by the Saudi Crown Prince is a key game changer in the Middle East. The Saudis have slowly been transforming their previously closed society. Movie theaters are now opening. AMC is going to be opening at least 100 theaters in the kingdom. Women are no longer being forced to cover themselves. They're even being allowed to drive, and soon they'll take to the roads by the thousands after they finish undergoing training by the end of June. The Saudis are not only blazing away to build the world's largest trade and economic zone, it is being done on a scale that has never been attempted before. Costing as much as $2 trillion to create, this new enterprise of theirs is roughly the size of the country of Egypt. Once finished, it will essentially isolate Iran and deal a huge blow to Iran's largely unchecked regional hegemony that it has enjoyed over the past several decades. With help from Russia and the terrorist group Hezbollah, Iran has cemented its hooks into Iraq, Yemen, and Syria. It is also a nuclear power, meaning it has a single nuclear reactor that generates power, courtesy of the Russians. Russia and Iran have spent billions propping up Syria's brutal dictator Bashar Assad, who remains in power. The Saudis have not only opened up their airspace to Air India flights heading to Israel now, its crown prince has even met with Jewish rabbis in New York. He has received the approval of American President Trump. These two leaders genuinely understand the obvious that Iran remains the largest threat to the Middle East, not Israel. But you can't tell the Palestinians this, for the simple fact that no single entity speaks for them. Ever since Hamas ousted the PNA in Gaza in a violent coup, where it murdered more than 650 members of Abbas's government, Hamas has controlled Gaza while Abbas barely clings to power in the West Bank. Abbas has made a point not to have any viable successor. In frail health with serious heart problems, he will go down in history as a fraudulent, failed leader, a man who has never been a genuine partner for peace. Once he passes away, Hamas will do everything it can to seize the rest of Palestine, which may force Israel to start annexing territory to help ensure its territorial integrity and security. Hamas has been supported at times by Egypt, Qatar, and of course Iran, until the terrorist attacks of September 11, 2001 by al-Qaeda against the USA. Even wealthy Saudi princes and other royals donated money and resources to it. What the Saudis have finally realized is that backing Islamic terrorists is not going to win them a sustainable future. Iran, on the other hand, counts on terrorism and terrorist tactics to further fuel its ambitions. Iran is a Shia Muslim country. The Saudis and others are Sunni Muslims. Both Shias and Sunnis have been gleefully murdering each other for over 1,400 years. Each considers the other to be a heretic and claims to be the one true path of Islam. Saudi Arabia has also been a key backer of Pakistan, including its support for terrorism against India. This is now changing, which is helping isolate Pakistan and driving it further into communist China's arms. China loves using Pakistan as a useful idiot-type nation to launch intrigues against India, or if a conflict were to ever break out between India and China, Pakistan could serve as a second front. As the Arab nations start to realign themselves and slowly warm up to Israel, the Palestinians have two choices now. Either embrace the obvious, peace, or history will largely pass them by, rendering their way of stupid thinking irrelevant. Gone are the days when a Palestinian commits a suicide bombing and many people feel sorry for the terrorists who did it. If anything, Israel's track record of maintaining genuinely peaceful relations with some of its past worst enemies, countries such as Egypt and Jordan, should show the Palestinians that their game's entire shtick are over. Hamas remains in power in Gaza only by using force. It will not permit multiple political parties nor genuine democracy. The same is true for the PNA and Abbas. Both Hamas and Abbas continue to loot the wealth of the Palestinian people. When they are not actively socking away billions over the years into their secret Swiss bank accounts, instead of using almost all of the international aid that they get from the global community to improve the daily lives of average Palestinians, they're too busy instead building smuggling tunnels, bringing in weapons, and starting wars against Israel that they have no chance of ever winning. By the time summer 2018 comes around, with the USA moving its embassy and eventually rolling out its proposed peace plan, the Palestinians and larger Arab world are going to have to make a choice. Either stay stuck in a loop and keep backing hatred, extremism, and terrorism, continue suffering and paying the price as they should for doing so, or embrace peace and unite together to try to stop Iran from further destabilizing the Middle East. Both Hamas and at least Abbas seem determined to go down with their own Titanics. They cannot win, despite their bluster to the contrary. These protests are not a new beginning, nor will they succeed. Instead, they are the first indicators that the collective demise of present-day Hamas, the Palestinian National Authority, and other like-minded Jew-hating terrorist entities are now inevitable. So that's my view on this. If you can disprove it, I'll be happy to publish it, but these are facts and I stand by them. We'll be back after this commercial break to bring on investigative journalist Art Levine.
From our broadcast studios in Hamilton, Ontario, Canada, to the world and beyond, you're watching the X-Zone Broadcast Network, www.xzbn.net.
AVS Media Demo.
The scientist and the mystic have been on an age-old, relentless search with one thing in common. They seek truth. Their paths converge in the 40,000-year-old practice of shamanism, an ancient science delving to the quantum level of life, facilitating healing, manifestation, and evolution. I'm Gwilda Wiyaka, the founder and director of Path Home Shamanic Arts School, a unique Colorado State-certified occupational school, training shamanic practitioners and teachers. We also provide classes for empowering personal lives through shamanism. Our certification classes are in week-long segments enabling international participation, and online classes and long-distance shamanic healing sessions are available. Come discover the science of magic in the limitless world of shamanism. www.findyourpathhome.com.
Did you know that when you're on the road with limited data or Wi-Fi, you can still listen to the X-Zone Radio Show with Rob McConnell, The Science of Magic with Gwilda Wiyaka, X-1, Dimension X, Space Patrol, and every minute of the X-Zone Broadcast Network by calling 213-401-0080, courtesy of Audio Now. No smartphone, app, or internet needed. It saves your data plan and it's free if you have unlimited minutes. Call 213-401-0080 to listen on any phone, anytime, anywhere. Remember 213-401-0080 for the best of the paranormal, parapsychology, and sci-fi radio programming anywhere, 24/7, 365. Rob McConnell here, presenting an overview for Nicholas Paul Jennings, author of a fascinating book, Amen. It presents facts revealed by Egyptologists, facts that enable us to understand why Amen is the beginning of creation of God. It provides recommendations for religious leaders of the major religions to unify their beliefs and teach the Word of God. Love one another. Amen informs people how mankind conceived God. It was the Egyptians that developed the concepts of a soul, a hereafter, and Son of God. And finally, after the worship of many gods, they conceived the belief in one universal God, the maker of all there is. For more information, visit www.futureofgodamen.com. That's www.futureofgodamen.com.
Welcome back to the third segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show. Again, my name is Cal Korff, and I'm your host, and the executive producer of the show is the one and only Rob McConnell. Now, folks, we spent the first two segments talking about the conflict that has erupted between the Palestinians, Hamas primarily, and Israel. You just heard my views on it. Now we're going to change subjects entirely, go a very different direction, because as I explained on the show many times, we cover everything from politics to the paranormal, which is a wide variety of subjects. I'd like to introduce to you our first guest, Mr. Art Levine. He's the author of a new book called Mental Health Incorporated: How Corruption, Lack Oversight, and Failed Reforms Endanger Our Most Vulnerable Citizens. Art is a prize-winning contributing editor to the Washington Monthly, which is a very prestigious publication, and he is a former Alicia Patterson Foundation Fellow and Nation Institute Investigative Fund grantee. He's written investigative and feature articles for Newsweek, The American Prospect, Salon, The Atlantic, The Daily Beast, Mother Jones, Truthout, AlterNet, and numerous other publications. I have known and respected, after getting to know his work since the late 1990s, Art is one of the top journalists, in my view, in the United States. He doesn't mince words, and he's now joining us. And welcome, Art, to the show.
Well, thank you, Cal. It's a real privilege to be here. And, the issues I'll be talking about seem very far afield from Hamas. They have one thing in common. Assuming your framing is correct, there's a lot of propaganda and myth-making around handling the opioid crisis, dealing with the VA, and addressing mental health care needs and gun violence in America. So there's a lot of myths and propaganda that get promoted that prevent us from getting to real solutions.
I think you're absolutely right about that, and I think your analogy is most apt. So let's take this from the top. I'm going to ask you a very blunt question. You know, I'm a very blunt kind of guy. Why should the average American care about the opioid crisis?
Well, there's a few reasons. First of all, it's the most significant in terms of fatalities alone health crisis that Americans have faced in the modern era. And that includes, in terms of deaths per year, the AIDS crisis that began in the 1980s. Now, opioids are basically synthetic versions, both legal prescriptions for pain and illegal medications that often began as pain-relieving medications before they became illegal, like heroin. So they are basically, synthetic versions of the pain-relieving and intoxicating effects of opium, and now they're various synthetics. But there's a lot of errors and misunderstandings. Now, why it's important is the level of deaths is so striking. And now there's about 64,000 deaths, nearly 64,000 deaths that occurred in the latest figures from the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, of all drug overdoses, and about 2/3 of that, about 63%, are from some forms of opioids. So naturally, that should be alarming. And just today, in the last few days, there's a major conference in Atlanta, and I've been in touch with researchers there and following the news. In Atlanta, it's the National Prescription Drug Abuse and Heroin Summit. And it's so problematic an issue that the Surgeon General of the United States at that summit recommended that anyone who knew anyone with any kinds of addiction or opioid should be carrying the anti-overdose medication on themselves or in the family. In other words, that's how widespread it is that people are at such risk of dying that they ought to be carrying Naxalone, the chemical name, or Narcan, or variations on them. Now, in fact, the drugs are very expensive and hard to get. They're not as available as they ought to be. But the thing is, this is illustrative of what goes wrong in how we address these very serious problems, because this is the very tail end. If the major solution, so on the ending the overdose deaths, is the Surgeon General talking about family members having Naxalone, in their purse or in their pockets or in the home, and contrary, the President of the United States and much of the administration is focused on a hardline approach, which, as the President has suggested, killing drug dealers who end up dealing drugs of one kind or another that lead to people's deaths, and cutting prescription drugs by 1/3 over the next 3 years. So this is part of the President's opioid plan, and that is, but it is very misguided on several fronts. The actual impact is going to be deadly.
Okay, understood. Let's back up just a little bit because most people listening to the show are only going to learn about this in detail from you, they normally don't pay attention. So you're saying, if I understand you correctly, that this is the worst crisis because the number of people dying from overdosing on this stuff is greater than those who died in the Vietnam War. Of those who are dying, about nearly 2/3 of the deaths are related to opioid-type overdoses, and it has reached such an epidemic crisis that our Surgeon General or government is saying that American citizens who know someone who may have an addiction to this or on these meds should carry a counter medicine, if you will, for lack of a better term, to treat them should something happen when they're around them. Isn't that kind of ridiculous? I'm speechless that they would even advise that.
Well, my feeling is if it actually could save some lives, it's okay. But that, in other words, it's not wrong, but that should be the main focus. Meanwhile, it's a very expensive drug. And this is so ridiculous an example. So the Surgeon General is recommending, Surgeon General Jerry Adams, he said, and he issued an advisory saying, be prepared, get Naxalone, save a life. The reality is it's real hard to get hold of. It's not that easy. It can be expensive. There are now city fire departments that can't get hold of it. So it's not going to be like you can walk in easily and pick it up at your local pharmacy. But the absurdity of it is, so here is the Surgeon General recommending getting this not that easy to obtain, can be expensive drug, while actual prescription medications that are helpful in opioids or such as something known by brand name Suboxone or buprenorphine or Bup as it's called in the street, that is very hard to get to, and there's limits of the number of medications and then there's the better known methadone, which has a higher risk but for use. So in other words, these are known as medication assisted treatment, and it's extremely hard to get it. Most drug treatment programs in the country that specialize in drug treatment don't offer it. And guess what? If an opioid user uses the medication-assisted treatment, it increases the likelihood that he or she won't die of an overdose up to 75%. So that's what the money that's in part what the money should be spent on, as opposed to the last stage. So instead of allowing people to get access to drug treatment if they've become addicted, instead it's the last stage. Have your family member many of the people are probably not shooting up inside the living room in front of their parents. So it is just one of about a dozen wrong-headed things that this administration is doing that is going to increase the likelihood of deaths from a variety of reasons, including the big sort of effort around cracking down on prescription drugs. And I'll be glad to tell you what's going wrong with that too, because the prescription drugs are not what is causing, by and large, most people to die right now from opioid overdoses, but you wouldn't know it from reading the newspapers or listening to federal health officials in their propaganda. In other words, it's mostly as little as 15% or less, and in some states it's like 8%, Massachusetts, of the opioid overdose deaths are due to actual prescription drugs that are legally manufactured. Overwhelmingly, it's due to illegal counterfeit fentanyl, much of it being shipped in from China, DHS packages, and completely unregulated, or the U.S. mails coming to people, and then being coming in either counterfeit stamp form as fake pills that people recognize, or being used to lace heroin. And the fentanyl deaths have increased about 500% in the last 3 years. So nothing we're doing is going to solve, nothing the administration is proposing or most people are doing in the health agencies and law enforcement is going to either stop the overdoses or prevent needless harm to legitimate chronic pain patients who were not abusing drugs, who were finding relief and some pain relief from using opioids, and they're being shut off, and there's increasing indications that this is leading to a rise in needless suicides, including among veterans.
Well, it seems to me, to use an analogy, that the approach being taken is to destroy the whole city just to kill the rat that you're trying to hunt down. That's ridiculous.
Yeah, right. Yeah. This hardline approach is just not going to work. And it's this con game that, it's a con game.
Yeah.
That is going to really hurt people.
All right. We have to take a break. We'll be back with Art on the other side of this commercial.
You have heard of the X Zone? Now watch it on Simul TV, plus 500 video games, live TV channels, free video on demand, worldwide, and more. Does this sound like tomorrow's television? Well, it is, but you can have it today, right now. It is Simul TV. Simul TV offers what the others only wish they could provide. 15 exclusive channels like X Zone, sci-fi, and horror. We are worldwide. No other provider offers that. 500 built-in video games. No need to have an extra expensive system. We have them included. Free video on demand. Live streaming events from around the world. Interactive online network, and much more. Tomorrow's TV today. Simul TV. Sound too good to be true? Well, it's not. You can have Simul TV today. Sign up at simultv.com. Do it today.
The new nonfiction book, Razor of Madness, is similar to cult movies like Clockwork Orange, Dragon's Tattoo, or The Other Side of Hell. Wayne Morin Jr. and Thomas Lee Howe will expose widespread and systematic deficiencies in this thought-provoking tell-all novel. Mind control rages among scholars in law schools. Human rights are ignored while thought reform and mental manipulation are accepted practices used as behavior modification. Dr. Louis Jolyon West comes to mind. Media and public scrutiny shows that United States mental hospitals are in fact destructive murder industries. Razor of Madness expose novel details this epidemic through an in-depth professional and personal investigation. For decades, there has been a revolving door policy that still releases killers and pedophiles back into society. The maestro of mind control continues to haunt America to this very day. Razor of Madness is available in paperback or as a downloadable ebook at Amazon.com.
I'm William S. Peckham. If you enjoy a good mystery with a touch of the paranormal, then you'll love my novel, From Out of the Woodwork. It's the story of a young Toronto contractor, Sean Kennedy, who buys derelict homes, guts them, and turns them into multi-family dwellings. Slums just waiting to happen. When Sean buys 29 Livery Lane, the house fights back. Former owners unexpectedly come out of the woodwork as he starts the destruction. The apparitions come to him when he touches old books, reads hidden letters, rummages through old boxes. finds a locket or reads a discovered manuscript of a murder mystery. From Out of the Woodwork will take you from 1899 to the horror of the World Trade Center, September 11, 2001. Check out From Out of the Woodwork on my website, www.williamspeckham.com.
Welcome back to the fourth and final segment here on Cal's Corner Radio Show on the X-Zone Broadcast Network. Once again, my name is Cal Korff. I'm your host, and Rob McConnell is the executive producer of the show. Now, as we saw in the last segment, or heard in the last segment, Art Levine, who is a top investigative journalist, he is also the author of the new book, Mental Health Incorporated: How Corruption, Lax Oversight, and Failed Reforms Endanger Our Most Vulnerable Citizens. Art is a walking encyclopedia on this subject. He's far more an expert than I'll ever be. And the purpose of having him on this show is to separate fact from fiction. And Art has brought up a bunch of points in the last segment. We're going to continue on this to end the show with this segment. And then next week, Art will be on again to continue to talk about this and any other issues that he wants to. The whole show will be devoted to that unless something unexpected happens. Okay, Art, if we can pick up from where you were saying, to briefly recap, we have a problem of a drug epidemic crisis. It is fueled by not prescription drugs, but illegal drugs shipped from, say, communist China. They're unregulated. There's no excuse for that. And then you take that element combined with, let's call it a ham-fisted approach by the Trump administration, where everybody seems to be painted with a single broad brushstroke, if you will. You add it all up, and the whole thing is a disaster. I think, to draw an analogy, this reminds me of the Prohibition days, when the outlawing of alcohol, one can argue, helped create the Chicago Mafia and other mafia-related enterprises who took advantage of that Prohibition era. And, of course, Americans continued to drink. And then finally the government woke up to the obvious that people are going to drink alcohol, and therefore they decriminalized it. So anything else you want to summarize?
Yeah, well, part of the prohibition is very important because there's a excellent paper that you can look up. It's called The Iron Law of Prohibition Revisited, related to fentanyl. So basically, it's by a law professor named Leo Beletsky, Northeastern University, and it's kind of the nuanced thinking that doesn't occur virtually anywhere in our health agencies or law enforcement or out of the Trump administration. Essentially, and it requires, the basic concept is, by cracking down completely in a sweeping manner on prescription medications, it has two forms of harm. One is people who were getting the legal prescription drugs for chronic pain and getting them appropriately and were not abusing them, they're suffering. And I have written a bit, and I have a forthcoming article that'll be out probably in the next few weeks regarding the increase in suicides coming about from the chronic pain patients not being able to get their medication because of these very strict limits being imposed, even though there's no evidence that reducing prescription drugs involuntarily for people who are using them legitimately will, help them either physically or emotionally or prevent overdoses. And there's some hints that even some new VA data that it's actually increasing suicides and overdoses both in the early months after people are cut off. Now,
okay, I have to ask you this question. Sorry to interrupt. Why would the government, of all entities, restrict a legal prescription drug? That's an oxymoron. Why would they do that?
It's because it requires an understanding of what, because it's sort of a significant overreaction, a foolish overreaction to a real problem, which was crooked and corrupt major drug companies, in particular Purdue Pharma, the maker of OxyContin, created through essentially bribery and grants to various health experts and health organizations like the Joint Commission, which regulates hospitals, this propaganda about, literally that opioids weren't addictive and that it could help all sorts of pain and problems. And there was a quadrupling of prescriptions that occurred. But so basically this is but that peaked about 6 years ago. So essentially there was a massive increase in prescribing. So you ended up with a situation where you have like a small town in West Virginia, as reported by the Washington Post and other outlets, that had 400 people in it, got 2 million prescriptions over the course of 9 million prescriptions, pills, in the course of 2 years for a town of 400. Well, what happened was the DEA was looking the other way, not paying any attention to clearly illegal diversion. And that is the key thing to understand, is the massive increase in prescribing was essentially a criminal operation by America's major pharmaceutical companies. And I have an attorney who's now part of suing about 100 jurisdictions, suing the middlemen like McKesson and the major drug companies like Purdue for spreading the opioid crisis for this reason. Their point is the business model was diversion. So this is very important to understand, and it's not understood by the policymakers. So the drug companies and their middlemen engaged in a lot of rhetoric about pain was undertreated, which might have had a kernel of truth. And then they just rode it into the ground, and under the masquerade of caring about pain patients, they pumped out endless amounts of pills, fully knowing that it was being diverted, in the same way that all the gun manufacturers know absolutely well that the guns, they're just like the NRA. They know fully well that the guns are being used illegally on the street market, sold by gangs, massively unneeded to have assault weapons. Same with the massive overprescribing. But this is the concept to have you have to have some intelligence. There was a big increase in overprescribing. Most of it went to people who were already substance abusers or became substance abusers, and only a small portion of it went to legitimate chronic pain patients. Now, in the overreaction, people with organic conditions, things you never even heard of. There's like 200 medical conditions, like certain kind of urological cystitis that's caused massive pain, all sorts of pain conditions. There's 200 disability-related conditions that cause severe, incurable pain. Those people are being cut off in part because of guidelines that were recommended as voluntary for primary care physicians. This is how absurd things are. So last year, in 2016, the CDC recommended as voluntary guidelines for primary care physicians, first-time patients, to look seriously about pain relief for first-time opioid users and consider voluntarily having no more than 90 milligram of morphine equivalents of pain medicine. So that was reasonable, sensible. But no, it has to be completely distorted. So what was meant as a voluntary guideline for people who had never used opioids is now being turned into a mandate in over 23 states, and driving law enforcement raids where chronic pain patients who'd been stable and healthy and functioning for 25 years are having all their opioids taken away, and they're killing themselves in droves. And no one cares. No one cares. That is very critical to understand that. So there's scattered news coverage, but if you read the newspapers today or listen to health officials, all you would see is, oh, we got to crack down on prescription opioids. In fact, if you look at the coverage that got Trump's, even the liberal Medicaid, even liberal publications, and I'm a liberal, tend to basically agree with we have to crack down on prescription drugs. This is because, in fact, Big Pharma has been crooked and corrupt, and that is about what 2/3 of my book is exposing. Mental Health Inc., with just INC, that exposes the corruption, particularly around antipsychotics and the corruption in opioids. And that was part of my cover story in Newsweek, how the VA contributed to the opioid crisis and killed thousands of veterans. Unfortunately, they're engaging in the same sort of heedless, indifferent approach to prescribing, but in the other direction. And I urge my listeners to read an excellent person named Dr. Stefan Kertesz, Kertesz, who's the leading scholar on these issues, and he's with the University of Alabama at Birmingham. And please read what he has to say about it, because he has all the facts and data. So we are having this overreaction to what was a big pharma corrupted over-medication drive, and it's doing nothing to stop the overdoses, and most likely because of so it was bad when substance abusers were using diverted pills, and most of the pills were diverted, okay, and that was their plan. How can you you can't have a better marketplace, create a generation of addicts, and that's what they've been doing since the 1990s, creating a generation of substance abusers. Now they're cutting back. So they had been using, most of the substance abusers, 75% of people using heroin and street drugs started by using illegally obtained prescription meds. Now those prescription meds are going away. They're still addicted. They can't get treatment. Only 1 out of 10 people get access to any specialized treatment. And my research indicates that out of that 1 out of 10 programs that offer drug treatment, 90% is ineffective.
Okay. Art, we'll pick up on this next week. Thanks for joining us. Welcome, and we'll talk to you next week.
Thank you.
Modern Esoteric, Beyond Our Senses by Brad Olson, consummates the lifeology story about where humanity originates. It is the lost continents, the primitive wisdom, the mythos of creation, and the rethinking of ancient history as we are taught in academia. There is much more to the story than what we have been told. As this is the first book in the Esoteric series, Modern Esoteric starts at the beginning of time and accelerates up to this modern age. Future Esoteric is book 2 in the series and takes a forward-looking position ahead of today with an open and honest examination of the ET issue and various unexplained phenomena. To discover the writings of author Brad Olson, visit www.bradolson.com. That's www.bradolson.com. Are you or is someone you know struggling with addictions, depression, anxiety, relationships, low self-esteem, lack of confidence, grief, success, and prosperity? Do you know that your subconscious belief plays a big role in the outcome of your hard work? We can help you permanently change the beliefs that may be the reason for your struggles and failures. We care about getting you the return on your investment and the results you are looking for. We can help you be free of the limitations of your past and in realizing your highest potential. We work with people by phone and Skype. For more information, visit us at www.ritasoman.com. That's www.ritasoman.com. Do you think you have energy problems in your home? Do you feel better when you're away than when you're home? Joey Korn is a global leader in the world of dowsing who specializes in personal energy clearing and space clearing. He can help you create an ideal energy environment in your home no matter where you live in the world. Learn about his remote spiritual house cleaning services and much more at www.dowsers.com. You can get Joey's book, Dowsing, A Path to Enlightenment, as well as other dowsing books and tools, Kabbalah books, and Walter Russell books. Joey's work is really amazing. Go to dowsers.com right now. That's DOWSERS.com or call 1-877-DOWSING. That's 1-877-369-7464.